Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's presentation as part of the Industry Insight webinar series. The topic this time is Become a Data-Driven Law Firm in 5 Steps. Speaking today will be Joshua Lenon. Joshua Lenon is an attorney admitted to the New York Bar. He studied law at St. Louis University School of Law, obtaining a Juris Doctorate and certificate in International and Comparative Law. During this time, Joshua clerked for the Missouri Attorney General, helping prosecute discrimination claims on behalf of Missouri citizens. He also studied European Union law at the University of Georgia School of Law's Brussels Legal Seminar. When working for Thomson Reuters publishing departments in both the United States and Canada, he helped legal practitioners improve their services. Joshua currently serves as lawyer in residence for Clio, providing legal scholarship and research skills to the leading cloud-based practice management platform for Vancouver, Canada. He's been a guest lecturer for movements like legal hacking and legal technology at schools like MIT, Suffolk Law, and Vanderbilt, as well as before organizations like Reinvent Law and the ABA Law Practice Futures Initiative. The presentation today will be followed by a Q&A. Please enter your questions into the question box in the webinar panel on the right side of your screen. All questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. We are recording this webinar, and we will be sending the video in a follow-up email in a few days. We will also post the video on our blog at www.lawtechnologytoday.org. Thank you all for joining us. We'll now begin the webinar.
Hi, everybody. I'm Joshua Lenon. Thank you for joining us at Becoming a Data-Driven Law Firm in Just 5 Steps. As you heard before, I'm a lawyer in residence at Clio. I'm an attorney admitted into New York, and the one thing they didn't tell you is my Twitter handle, which is @JoshuaLenon. And please feel free to reach out to me at any time with questions. So I actually made a classic data mistake, and I have included too much data in this presentation. So we're gonna rush, but please feel free to type in your questions at any time, and I'm happy to answer them as we hit the end. But to save everybody some time, here's the 5 steps that I think we need to take to become a data-driven law firm. The first of which is valuing data. We're gonna talk about what that really means, not just holding on to data, but the use of data. We're going to take a look at benchmarks for your law firm, and I'm going to do a little bit of a deep dive into Clio's Legal Trends Report, our 2017 version, but I'm also going to tell you some other benchmark sources that are available to you and compare them. We're going to talk about how to centralize your data. I think that's a really important topic that most firms think is quite difficult, but it's really becoming very simple nowadays. We're going to take a look at how to report against your data, and the last thing we're going to take a look at is data longevity. Most law firms don't really think about that when picking tools that they're using now, but it's becoming more and more of an issue as law firms age, how they not only value their data, but preserve the value of that data for the long term. So let's dive into the first step, valuing data. To value data, I did some research on what is a data-driven organization, and there's this great book from O'Reilly that talks about that. And they define data-drivenness, for lack of a better term, as about building tools, abilities, and most crucially, a culture that acts on data. So it's not just enough to have data or to look at data, but you're using it to guide your actions. And they come up with really 2 basis points for how you know you're a data-driven organization. 1, you must be collecting data, and if you're a law firm, you're already doing this. You just don't really know it. And 2, that data must be accessible and queryable. And that last part's really important. And throughout the book, they talk a lot. They talk of a lot of examples, and in lots of articles that I read about this, they talk about a lot of examples on how companies are actually making their data really available to their employees, which is something that's somewhat counterintuitive to law firms, because they allow people on the ground to really search across the company's metrics and find the connections that they weren't existing before. And it allows the companies to use their data to not only generate reports, which is what a lot of you are probably looking for in this presentation, but also to trigger alerts and inform analysis. It's the idea of being proactive rather than reactive and allowing your data to do that for you. So if you're looking at data, you want to understand the 3 different types of data analysis that are out there, and the fact that you should be including all 3 of these together. So if we look at past, present, and future, we'll want to know, for example, what happened, and that's reporting, and good tools should enable that for you. But we also want to be able to look at what's happening now, right? And those give alerts, and the alerts should be giving you a recommendation as to what your best action is, right? And then we need future facing uses of data, and that's called extrapolation. So we're going to take a look at past trends from reporting, but try and figure out how that's going to continue into the future. And this is the most difficult part about being data driven, and one that's the hardest to teach people. So I'm going to give you a quick oversight on how you can kind of bring this all together. And we will give you a copy of these slides, so don't feel like you have to rush and write all this down. But one, obviously start with data. The second is develop intuitions about the data and the question that it answers. And the good news is you're trained to do that step right now. I think when we talk about being able to think like a lawyer, that's a large part of it, is being able to take a look at what a case is saying and what the black letter law is saying, and then all that gray area around it. That's the intuition that we have learned to develop. So step 3 is formulating a question. It's very much like the scientific method. Step 4 is leveraging current data. Okay, and this is where a lot of law firms trip up, because they haven't taken the steps to bring their data together such that it's reportable, right, and testable. 5 is create a framework where you can run tests and experiments. And 6 is analyze those results to draw insights about the questions. If you do these 6 simple steps, you will probably be data driven in terms of O'Reilly's definition of data driven. And what that helps you do is it will let you use data as critical evidence to inform and influence your strategy. Now, where are we seeing this occur within law firms? We're seeing law firms use data to direct informed client outcomes, to guide practice efficiencies, and to drive their business activities. I'm going to give you examples of each of these really quickly. So my favorite example for informed client outcomes is a tool put out by LexisNexis. It's been out for several years now. It's called the MedMal Navigator. And what it allows you to do is you click a medical topic, throw in certain case value assessment facts, right? Like, how old was the patient at the time of an accident? Is there a claim of lost earnings? Has the plaintiff settled separately with other defendants, et cetera, et cetera. And as you put in these answers into MedMal Navigator, it'll actually start telling you things about your case. For example, how well it matches existing cases, right? And what is the potential case value amount that could be applicable in this fact pattern when compared to previous cases? This is a predictive outcome, future facing. Exactly the type of thing we want to be driving in a data-driven law firm. And it's a tool that does that because Lexis has bought MedMal Navigator, pumped a ton of data into it, but pulled it all together with a very simple interface. And this allows you to then turn to your client and say, look, given your situation, here's a likelihood of a certain amount or ranges of amounts that we can expect in a case like this. And that'll allow your client to really plan their strategy as well as your own law firm business strategy around cases like that. And there are lots of tools that are coming out for this right now. We're seeing a lot of them being bought up by Lexis on their predictive analytics, and it's very interesting to see how those are being built. You can also use data to guide practice efficiencies, and a great example of this is the Huneval law firm out of North Carolina. And they handle foreclosures and defaults on behalf of bank clients. And when they were pitching this, they were telling their clients they were able to take a case from intake to filing within 14 to 20 days. But then when they started looking at data from dissatisfied clients, they found that their average file preparation time was 69 days. And they did a top to bottom assessment, right? They talked to everybody in the workflow chain, all of the employees, and they found a lot of small details in their data were where their firm was being tripped off. For example, and this is from an article written about this law firm, they found that their printer was just on the wrong location, that the people who actually had to print as part of their workflow were all the way on the other side of the office from the printer, and they were losing potentially hours each day from people walking back and forth to the printer. Now, it sounds like a very trivial detail, but if you're a volume-based law firm like Huneval is, you know, the minutes back and forth add up to hours each day. That adds up to days of lost productivity each month, and that was a problem. So only once they did that data review were they able to create process improvements that gave reduced time of 88%, and they were able to bring their intake to filing down to 8 days. So not only were they beating their claim to their clients, they were able to do so in a way that really improved service to their clients, and it actually won them a lot of business. And the other thing that you can do is you can drive your own business activities in front of that. So this is a picture of ASA Law Group, and they're a Clio customer, and we've actually done a video with them doing a deep dive into their law firm. But one of the things that they told us was really interesting is they discovered by talking to their employees that a lot of them wanted to work from home. And so what they were able to do was adjust their billable hours targets to better meet the idea that they would have a mobile workforce. And so they were able to reduce the square footage of their offices. They were able to reduce their financial overhead because of that. And they instead invested that money in tools that allowed their lawyers to work from home several days a week. And basically it gives them a smaller office, but a greater head count. And that's one way that you can use data to drive business activities. Okay, so these are great examples of what a data-driven organization is and different ways in which you might see that occur in a law firm. But I think the very first thing you need to do before investing in any type of data tools or any type of new processes is to benchmark your law firm and see what you're measuring against. So you probably know how your law firm did last year. What you don't know is that a good or a bad number? So I want to give you some examples of places that you can look at now to start benchmarking your law firm, comparing it against greater trends. And we'll talk about some strengths and weaknesses in all of those. The first thing I want to talk about is Clio's Legal Trends Report. Now, this is the second one that we put out. We put it out every year, and I'm going to blitz through it, but that's okay because you can get a copy for free, and we're going to tell you how as part of our follow-up email. It's important to know that this is something different than what you see before. This isn't just a survey of 50 law firms and then we write a report about it. We actually use extracted, aggregated, and anonymized data given to us by Clio users, right? So there are participating law firms. Now it's important, we don't actually see any case files. There's no personally identifiable information, and our customers have the ability to opt out of this. So it's all contributed data. But even with these methodologies, so paid subscribers only, limited to the US, must have created billing data in the calendar year of 2016, et cetera, we were still able to get 60,000 law firms giving us a really deep insight into the use of Clio by them. And from that, we can make some extrapolations on the legal industry as a whole. And so if you're looking for a report that really tells you more about the financial aspects of running a law firm, this may be the best tool out there. And it's enabled us to do things like publish our billable hourly index. And what we're able to see over the length of time in Clio is that lawyers are getting a rising pay rate, the blue line here. And in actuality, it's actually a little bit more than the consumer price index. Lawyers are doing better than the economy as a whole, but law firms and non-lawyer rates aren't necessarily keeping up. And that's interesting to us because what we see is non-lawyers are kind of dragging law firms' profitability down. Now, one thing we can interpret from that is maybe you're not charging enough on the amount of staff that you have, or maybe you're not focusing them on really financially productive activities. We don't have an answer as to what every individual law firm is doing, but we can see from this data alone that there's a big difference in how non-lawyer rates are impacting your law firm. And we know that these differ from practice area to practice area. So as part of the 2017 report, we defined 32 different practice areas, the most common practice areas used by solo, small, boutique law firms out there. And we were able to see rates both in the high areas and in the low areas for for different types of law firms that bill on an hourly basis. Now, again, that's a big caveat. If you're doing flat fee, like we noticed that a lot of criminal lawyers do flat fee, it's not necessarily going to be reflected here in the billable hour index, but we're able to get insight to when lawyers do. We're also able to see differences like urban versus rural attorneys and how much money they make. And you can use this data to start benchmarking your own law firm. And we're even able to drill down into some greater metropolitan areas to see the average rate out there as well. Now, we can't drill down too far, right? We can't do a small town in northern Idaho because really how many lawyers are there? And we might risk re-identifying them. But for a lot of the major cities in the US, we can tell you what a lawyer costs right now. And you can use that to compare against your own firm's services, your own firm's finances, to see if that's close to the target that you should be charging. Maybe you find out you're charging too little. Maybe you're providing a premium service and now can justify charging more than the average amount. There's one place where you can really pull this all together, and that's a rate comparison tool that we've actually put together for you, and it's online. And we'll be sharing that tool as well as part of the follow-up email. But you can take a look at this and see, how does my firm stand when it comes to billing? And that's something that I think is something that lawyers have never had before. You've always had to walk down the hall and figure that out. Apologize for going fast. There's a ton of data to cover. We're also able to come up with some law firm KPIs, and I think these are interesting for measuring your firm's financial performance beyond billing rates. So one of the things we noticed is that lawyers on average work an 8-hour day, but they're only really billing about 2.3 hours per day, and they're only able to collect about 1.6 hours worth of revenue per day on average. And we actually break these numbers down on the right-hand side. You can actually use these numbers to really help plan and do some financial forecasting on your law firm. For example, if you know that if you send out a bill for $100, on average, only about 86 of those dollars are going to be paid. That's what a collection rate of 86% kind of works out to be. Then you can start planning financially on, can my firm run on 86% of the anticipated billed revenue? And how do I adjust my billable targets because of that? We've done some great work with that for law firms, and we're happy to walk you through some of that as well in another presentation. But this report actually breaks down utilization rates by state, realization rate by practice area, and we can even see that different practice areas actually have vastly different collection rates. And you can use this again to adjust your own rates to kind of buffer against this. So for example, if I'm in an insurance firm, right? And this is probably insurance defense, and I know that 28% of my bill is probably going to be argued or written off or not paid. I need to plan my law firm around the 72% that does get paid. And how do I make that happen faster, better, more regularly? And we actually saw something very interesting about that. So we saw that law firms that utilize trust accounts and advance deposits into those trust accounts actually had both higher realization rate, they recorded and passed on more billed hours to their clients, and a higher collection rate than law firms that don't. And so while trust accounts seem like a really, quite frankly, burdensome overhead for a lot of law firms, especially when you're really dealing with just an accounts receivable, getting the money up front makes a big difference in your law firm's finances. It's basically a 20% raise. And why wouldn't you give yourself a 20% raise by using something like that? Data also tells us that cases are seasonal. For example, tax, which is no surprise, is really front-loaded in the beginning of the year, a lot of cases, whereas insurance work really starts rising steadily only in the last Q3 and Q4. And so using data like this, and again, it's available in the report, will help you plan your law firm finances. If I know there's going to be a dip in June, how am I preparing my law firm workflow for that rise in October? Am I bringing on more clients? Am I investing time in technology and training so that when I get to October, I'm ready for that bump? And the last thing I want to cover is we're starting to be able to determine the monetary value of a case. We're able to see what law firms are charging. Now, this is highly, highly qualified data, right? Because we don't really know how far along the cases are. There are some that we can kind of anticipate, right? We know that the majority of criminal cases end in a pleading, right? Very few go to trial. We know that traffic offenses tend to also be pled out. But we don't know, for example, in personal injury, where those cases end up. So all we really see is a range of billing data that's used in Clio and how long those bills take to get paid. But we can make some extrapolations from that. And from that, we can tell you basically the average value of a matter for you. And so if we take a look at family law right here, and the average value was just a little over $3,000, what are the questions you can ask knowing that data, and what tests can you run about that? For example, you can ask, how much can I afford to spend to acquire this case and still be profitable? We can ask, are the matters I'm working on below, at, or above this benchmark? Am I pulling in the right clients? And how can I test for higher value clients? If I decided to offer an alternative fee arrangement, how would I price it, right? Would the certainty of a $4,000 family law matter be worth it to a person to come in when the average is $3,000? So it could be above, it could be below. And how many new matters do I need in order to reach my revenue targets? These are all questions that you can be asking as a part of designing your law firm. But it's this data at the beginning that makes the formulation of these questions and the experiments that come after to test these questions something that you've never had before. So what are some other benchmark sources? Really quickly, I want to touch on some. Every year, Georgetown Law School and Peer Monitor with Thomson Reuters actually put out the report on the state of the legal market. And I read this religiously. It comes out in January every year. It's available for free. Please go ahead and go out and download it. And what does it talk about? It talks about demand for legal services in the Am Law 100 and mid-sized law firms. Now, mid-size, they mean like 500 plus lawyers. But what's interesting is their demand remains flat. Their average billable hour is 475, and as we saw from Clio's billable hour index, that's a different number. So you can compare that against your own practice area, your own law firm size, and realize where you fall. And the collection rate realization is approximately 80%, which is below, again, what we saw for Clio using law firms. So all of this is to tell you there's a lot of data out there, and the data tells different stories. And it's better to use multiple sets of data for benchmarks and see where you fall in between them than to go on just one benchmark alone. Now, where does this fail? It's big law only, and they use a really small sample compared to the Legal Trends Report. We're talking hundreds compared to the tens of thousands that we see in the Clio Legal Trends Report. Another report that I rely upon is the PricewaterhouseCoopers Law Firm Survey. So for example, it tells us that fixed fees are 25% of the top 25 firms' revenues that they survey. And that's interesting because do flat or fixed fees make up a similar percentage in your law firm? Should they? Why are big law firms focusing on that? They notice that staff costs are approximately 38 to 42% of a law firm's revenue, and so are part of their income. So are you spending an equivalent amount? Should you be spending more? Does that give you an increased earnings by bringing on staff like that? And this one is one that I find particularly interesting. The average lockup days from when work starts until a law firm gets paid, averages from 120 to 152 days. That's almost 3 to 6 months. And are you having similar problems billing and collecting from your clients? Can you pull it down? And where does this report fail? Well, it tends to look at a smaller market. It focuses on the UK primarily and does some comparison outside of that. Another one that I rely upon heavily is the Court Statistic Project on their caseload highlights. And this is a report that came out in 2013, estimating the cost of civil litigation. And it does a deep breakdown of the costs and time per litigation stage for several different types of cases in the state courts. And it also talks about the impact of experience on time and cost in litigation. This is really important stuff, right? If you know that discovery is the second most expensive part of your case, you can be looking at ways to either mitigate that impact or plan strategically around that right now. Where does it fail? It's dated. It came out in 2013, and it focuses on state court litigation only, but it's a really good starting point for taking a look at the stages and costs of litigation that may be impacting your clients to this very day. And the last benchmark I want to give you before we jump into the last two parts of the program are state economic practice data. Now, this is done sporadically. It's done on a state-by-state basis, but I find it very helpful for taking a look at attorney time allocated to billable and non-billable professional activities. It dives deep into firm overhead expenses and staffing costs. This is data that you may not necessarily get elsewhere. So where does it fail? It's sporadic. Most bar associations and jurisdictions do these every 2 to 3 years. And of course, it's specific to a jurisdiction. Now, that doesn't mean it's bad, right? If Tennessee does one and you're in Kentucky, you'll probably get some comparable data, but a Tennessee one probably won't be as comparable to somebody in California. So look for these reports if they exist in your bar or jurisdiction and use them. They're highly valuable in setting up benchmarks. And once you pull these sources together, every one of them that I've listed is free, they can start to paint a picture or develop an intuition of where your law firm needs to fall amongst those, right? You'll be able to see your flat fee percentage, your billable hour rate, your collection rate, your overhead and other firm costs, and how can you bill against that? And from there, you can really start asking questions. Now, you've got benchmarks. The next step is to centralize your data. And the big issue for law firms is we get a ton of data, but we keep it in separate resources. So we have email. The average lawyer spends about 17 hours per week in email. That's a huge amount of information that's cut off often from the rest of your case files. And that leads to lawyers literally printing out emails and sticking them in a file somewhere, which is the most ridiculous thing ever. There are your case files themselves that include all the dockets or all the documents of your case. There's the research you've done on behalf of your clients, and oftentimes that'll live in the research tool that you use. There are the dockets that the court generates, and there's billing data, which will exist in your billing platform. And each of these parts of data can be used to tell a different story, and they can also be used to complement each other, but only if you centralize them and sync them. Now, fortunately, that's getting easier than ever before. What we're seeing is the rise of cloud computing platforms for law firms means that it's very easy for you to take tools that you're already using and sync them together. So I'm just going to show you a quick example of this, but understand that this can happen for virtually every internet tool that you use now. On the left, we have Outlook. It's the most commonly used email program for lawyers. And on the right, we've got a screen from Clio. We have built an integration between these two services that allows me, without leaving Outlook, to do things like run a timer as I'm answering email, to print, and I'm using air quotes that you can't see, this email directly into my case file in Clio. I'm even able to grab the attachments and store them as documents within my case file in Clio. And the last tool which we've built, which I think is really interesting, is what we call smart filing. And what it does is it allows your Outlook to look at the past 48 hours and select emails that fit certain criteria, like it has a contact, that's a part of a case file. And then it asks, do you want me to file all of these selected emails to the selected case file? Click yes, it's done. Your last 48 hours of email, all centralized in one location in Clio, along with your documents, your calendar, your billing information, et cetera, et cetera. By centralizing this data, you actually get two really good benefits. One, you get a more comprehensive view of your cases and all the data associated with you. But two, it actually will help you when it comes to data longevity, and we'll discuss that a little bit at the end. But it makes it much easier to preserve your data as your law firm continues to grow and advance and become a larger, better entity. So look for tools that sync back and forth, like this example. You'll see them in virtually every instance, right? Dropbox can sync into practice management now. Legal research engines can sync into your practice management system now. Your billing data can be exported from your practice management solution to your accounting solution. So this automatic back and forth gives you the ability to then use data from a variety of sources through single tools, and that's really important for you. And that leads us to reporting on your data. Boy, I'm going over today. I think there are 4 types of reports that you need to be pulling from your tools: alerts, dashboards, reports, and analysis. So alerts are just that. They let you know something important when you need it. And here's an example of a statute of limitations reminder. It's built into Clio, and you can establish that with every case that you enter. But that's a really important date that may be far off in the future for you and your client. And so rather than having to every day remind yourself that there's an upcoming statute of limitations, you can record that once, offload that mental energy to a tool, and get an alert when it becomes important to speed up your actions. It's that type of recommendation that we saw at the very beginning of the presentation. You need a dashboard that gives you at a glance overviews of where your case is. And here's another example where we see how much I've billed, what's my outstanding balance, how much funds does my client have in trust funds. And here I see a discrepancy between the two, right? My client owes $16,000. They only have $7,000 in trust. Do I want to issue a new trust request? Right? Dashboards should give you both insight and calls to action. If you don't have that, you're probably missing opportunities to improve your law firm. You also need reports, and I just threw up an example of an accounts aging report here. What this report does is takes a look at your invoiced work to see what amount is current, as in we're waiting to be paid, what's past due, what are the totals for all of this, right? If I have $4,000 post due with this one client, wouldn't that be worth my time, just 5-10 minutes, calling that client and making sure they know about this amount? Wouldn't it be worth my firm's time and making sure that we start collecting on this, especially before this billable amount starts reaching the 90 days, when we know from data that it's almost impossible to collect a bill once it's 90 days out. It's very difficult to get the full amount. So you should have reports like this that give you insight deeply into where things are happening within your law firm and where you should be spending your time. And the last bit is analysis. And I want to give an example of this from custom fields. So much information in law, in the practice of law, is quite frankly idiosyncratic. The type of information that I'll track for a traffic case will be different than the type of information I track for a felony case. There may be some overlap, but I need the ability to organize that data specifically how I need it. So that way I can start doing predictions against that. If I see the same cop has given out a ticket every time and failed to show up for court, I can start making predictions on that. So I need to have that information top of mind. And look for a tool that allows for customization, like custom field columns and custom field displays that make the appropriate information come top of mind. Now, if you're looking for some advanced reporting tools, I recommend Clocktomizer. It's a tool built specifically for financial reporting for law firms. It's a great tool with great visual requirements in order to make things known for you. And if you're looking for a predictive tool, here's one that I recommend as well, and that's Digitory Legal. What's interesting about them is they do case budgets, and they enable you to use your own financial data to start making predictions on the cost per stage and activity of litigation matters, and they're expanding that out. But it's really interesting for you to be able to walk your client through, here's what it could potentially cost up to point A. If we continue to point B, here's where it might cost a little bit more. And the last thing I want to cover is data longevity. So as you're making choices about data and centralizing your data, realize that your firm is probably already 10 years out of date, even if you're using the most advanced tools, because you need to be thinking about how I'm going to be using this data 10 years into the future from now. So there's a computing axiom called Schofield's first law of computing. That's never put data into a program unless you can see exactly how to get it back out again. And I have a little bit of addendum. The passage of time makes almost every electronic file format inaccessible. So here are some concerns that you need to have as a law firm. Readability. You want your data to be readable far into the future, right? And this is the classic word perfect versus word dilemma that many lawyers have experienced for decades. You are comfortable and use word perfect. The rest of the world uses Word and can't even open your file. So pick tools that, quite frankly, are either open or have the ability to be migrated. Right? Accessibility, you want to be able to access your data, and mobile apps are actually a large component of that nowadays. Practice of law is no longer limited to your office. And portability, you want to be avoiding proprietary formats, and a lot of legacy software in law does this. They store your information in a black box. You have no idea how to get it out or even what you can get out. So what should you be looking for? Look for tools and organizations that follow ISO standards. Here are 3 that I'll just mention quickly: PDFA, OpenOffice XML, which is used in Microsoft Word, and SQL and other open data source database formats are really important for you to making sure that you're able to put your data into a tool and get it out into the future. Like, all of these are rated for the next 50 years, right? What's interesting to me is that cloud services right now are the most standard adherent storage option for law firms. So not only can they potentially give you greater security at a lower cost, but they also actually migrate your firm onto a platform that will set you up for the next 10 years, even if you don't stay with that tool. And odds are you probably won't after 3 to 5 years. It'll still be a tool that uses strong standards, compatible formats that will enable you to migrate and continue to access the value of your data for years to come.